Welcome to the Counselling Armchair, hosted by the counselling team at RMIT University. This podcast aims to help you manage your university life so you can be at your best. We'll be sharing with you tips on student life here and ways to enhance your mental well-being.
Hi listeners, we're very glad to have you back with us today to talk about a topic that's very timely for this stage of the year as we head into the festive season. The saying, happy holidays, doesn't always reflect the reality of how we feel at this time of year. Sometimes it can be a real struggle and you can feel as though you're the only one not doing well. But today we're interviewing our counsellor Beck to help us understand some of the challenges of the festive season and some great ideas for how to enhance your own well-being during this time so that the festive season brings calmer seas instead of storms. Thanks for being here with us today, Beck. We often like to start with a bit of an introduction. So would you like to tell the listeners a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the podcast. So my name is Beck. I'm a psychologist and clinical psych registrar, and I'm one of the student counsellors at the RMIT CAPS team. I live here locally in Melbourne, and some of you might recognise me if you attended some of our webinars this semester. You might recognise my voice coming through.
Fantastic. Great to have you here, Beck. Yvonne and I are both thrilled to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right, well, look, let's just jump in perhaps with the first question. We wanted to start with asking you, for some of us, this festive time of the year, as we've mentioned, can be a bit of a struggle. You know, it can be difficult rather than a happy time we're expecting. Do you come across that in your work, Beck?
Absolutely. So work and personal life. I think Christmas is, psychologists and counsellors might not be surprised, it's a busy time of year for psychologists into the end of the year. So a conversation that I have a lot this time of year is around managing the expectation versus reality. And it's actually quite common that we might expect that everyone else is feeling happy, is doing well, but there's some pretty common themes that tend to come up at the end of each year. So as we're coming into December, so it lines up with often finishing up with work for the year, perhaps finishing up with study. If you're one of our RMIT students who's just finished semester 2, congratulations.
Yes.
And so it's a bit of a perfect storm. So there are a few things that come in this time of year that can impact on our well-being. So I can say, look, coming into December, so there might be a bit of a change in routine. So for example, if you've been studying, you might suddenly find that you have a lot more unstructured time on your hands. If you're working, you might find this time of year is actually a time of winding up and things getting a bit busier and trying to get everything done for the end of the year. So a few key things that I see come up, that expectation versus reality. You know, I should be happy or I should be feeling relaxed. Often we can be feeling a bit tired, a bit burnt out, coming out of the pandemic as well.
That makes so much sense, Beck. I think I was just thinking about what you said a moment ago about how having unstructured time all of a sudden can be really unsettling, and you wouldn't expect it, would you? Because you'd sort of, you know, the whole time that you're in study mode, and I remember way back in the dinosaur days when I was a student, you know, you'd be going through your exams and be going, oh my God, I can't wait until they're over. I can't wait. And then it all finishes, this hectic, crazy wind up, and then you can find yourself a bit at a loss, and you don't expect that, do you?
No. And look, I think that what's important to recognise is it can often be a time of pretty significant stress, and it's not automatic that we just adjust to it. So in terms of our nervous system being activated, in terms of adjusting to our new routine, and it's actually quite common to experience feelings of unease or anxiety or low mood as you're making that adjustment. So one I would say very common, and making that conscious adjustment into getting a bit of balance back into your day. You don't have to schedule every minute, but a little bit of structure and routine. So that's certainly one that comes up, as I said, feeling tired, burnt out. A really common one as well is managing, I would probably group them together and say managing being alone and managing being together over the festive season. So,
interesting. Both challenging, right?
Yeah, so being alone, so loneliness is really common. I know we have a lot of international students and people, Australia has, you know, a really high proportion of people who are either born overseas, have family overseas, or who might not be connected with family, even if you're local. So it can be a time of a lot of loneliness over the festive period. Conversely to that, it can also be a challenging time because we spend a lot more time than we otherwise might around family. Well, we often see the hallmark picture of a happy family gathering around the tree if you celebrate Christmas, or if you don't. through that period. This can also be challenging because, you're around people that you might not spend such prolonged periods of time with. So often exposed to, different opinions or, pretty intense. In a time of, if we're all feeling that stress, a lot of conflict can come up around Christmas. So it can be a pretty stressful time of year.
It makes sense. The other thing I was just thinking of is, does anyone have this happen where everyone in your life says we must catch up before Christmas?
Yes.
Does that happen
urgency.
to you guys?
Yes.
It's like there's this sense of like the world will end on Christmas Day, therefore we must catch up before Christmas.
And it's the same time every year. And I think one thing I'd add into the mix for this year that I've been having a lot of conversations about personally and at work is we're also coming out, if you've been in Melbourne for the last 2 years, we're coming out of a period of lockdowns and a period of our social battery is far less. And so the amount of energy it takes just for us to get our everyday stuff done, we're not used to socializing. And so it is actually Christmas coming in. A lot of people are feeling quite stressed trying to manage whether it's work, study, your own mental health, and all of these catch-ups. I think this month I've had the delayed weddings, 30th, everything else coming in that didn't happen during COVID, as well as Christmas. So there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, that makes
also
so
pressure
much sense.
to remain well, where look, the reality is, COVID is still happening in the background. Maybe it's not as reported as much in the media, or we don't hear about it in our everyday conversation, but there might be also this pressure to stay well because then we've got to have our gatherings. We've missed out on it for the past 2 years, and now there's this pressure to really make it happen.
That's
so like you said,
true.
Liz, this we must catch up feels a lot more layered this time, because
so right.
We've come out of lockdown. We've definitely got to catch up all the more.
Yes.
And for some people can still be the anxiety about catching COVID. We might be spending time with family who are immune compromised. There's a lot of extra layers this festive season that might not have come in the past.
So true. And I reckon there must be just on that. There'd be people that are like don't want to socialise because they are afraid of catching COVID. And then there'd be other people that perhaps have the opposite view of like, we've got to just live our normal lives kind of thing. And when those two things kind of clash, it can be difficult to navigate, right? Because you might be saying, look, I'd rather not catch up because I'm worried about catching COVID. And the person that you're supposed to catch up with might be saying, don't be ridiculous. You're being silly. Like it's time to move on sort of thing. That can be challenging, right? Yeah, it's a hot button. Yeah.
Definitely. So multi-layered, it's at end of the year, like it's time we're often feeling a bit tired, a bit burnt out. There's some extra layers this year. But I think it's well worth having. I was excited to come in and talk about it today because it's something that I'm very passionate about, because I have a lot of conversations around this time of year about the expectation versus reality with the festive season.
Yeah.
If throughout today, so I personally celebrate Christmas. If you're listening today and you don't celebrate Christmas, please interchange that with, you often use holiday season, Christmas break, summer break. That language might slip up now and then because that's what I personally celebrate. But
Quite
if you
okay.
don't, it might be applicable at the same time. What I want to add in as well, so the holidays as well often can trigger quite a bit of grief. So it might not necessarily be a memory to do with Christmas. It might be to do with past breaks, but these significant events often trigger a bit of stress about the passage of time. So if we've experienced a loss throughout our lives, whether it's the passing of a loved one, a traumatic event, then Christmas can often be, or the holiday season and break can be a bit of a trigger point, both for loneliness, for memories showing up, and for some difficulties through that time.
It's good to be prepared for that, really, in a way, isn't it? Because sometimes I think my own experience of grief has been that sometimes it catches you completely unawares, and I think Christmas or the holidays or something you would normally do with your loved one, you might not be thinking about that as being a potential trigger, but all of a sudden it is, and you find yourself feeling really upset, like, why am I feeling this way? And just even understanding that that's probably why you're feeling that way. It's a bit of a re-triggering of your grief, and just take good care of yourself during that time.
Absolutely. And it can be a grief from a loss, it can be a breakup or something else.
Exactly.
Expecting that it might be something that shows up, and how we care for ourselves through that time is, it's really important.
Yeah, such a good point.
Well, actually, Liz, you've raised a really good point about just being prepared for that. What I was actually curious about is, so how do I know if I'm not doing so well, during this festive season? Everyone else is out celebrating, having a good, smashing good time. But what would be some things that may show up if I'm not doing so well, Beck?
Yes. Well, I'm going to be a typical psychologist here and try and be proactive. Often this stuff, we notice it when it comes up. If we're really at the pointy end, we usually know. We can usually tell if we're really not doing great.
Yeah.
It can be so beneficial to learn and reflect on what are my early signs of either stress or not feeling great. What are my early warning signs? Because it's often easier to put things into place at those earlier levels. Festive season wellbeing preparation begins in November. So if you're listening to this podcast, or December when you're listening to this podcast, there's kind of two questions that I tend to ask when I'm working with someone and for myself, how we can start to identify these early warning signs. One is, what do I notice when I'm not feeling great? And the other is, what might people who are close to me notice?
Great questions.
Yeah, because sometimes people might pick up, right? I don't know if you guys have experienced, people might pick up things that we might not necessarily notice about ourselves when we're feeling stressed out or feeling down.
So true. We recently went on a family trip, actually. I've got 2 kids. Things all got a little bit fraught and my husband started being quite grumpy. And the kids were like, oh, my God, why is Dad so grumpy? And I sort of said to him with this thing around noticing when other people notice. And I said, are you okay? He goes, oh, God, yeah, I am being really grumpy, aren't I? And he hadn't, I mean, he probably was aware of it at some level, but me pointing it out to him sort of tuned him into it a little bit. And then he's like, yeah, I think I'm stressed about this, this and this. And then we were sort of able to sort of sort it out, have a conversation about it. Sometimes it becomes very apparent to other people, maybe not so much to yourself.
Definitely. And, because we're in it, right? It's right in front of us. I'll start with things other people might notice because that's generally a little bit of a shorter list.
Yeah.
You might notice common signs when we're stressed out, we're more irritable or snappy.
Yeah.
So we might, things that normally might be mildly annoying, a saying called "it's not about the tea towel." And that's if you come home and someone's left the tea towel out and you just think, oh my God, and you just kind of explode. So feeling more irritable or snappy, you might feel it yourself, might get that feedback from others. It might either be a more intense version of something you'd normally feel, or it might be a completely different to how you'd normally respond. So feeling more irritable and snappy or others noticing, that is one.
Yep.
Withdrawing, so not replying to messages, maybe not calling back, not coming out, that might be something. So I'd really encourage people to ask someone that you trust, who you're close with, hey, what do you notice when I'm not feeling great? And it can be as simple as our posture. It might be things that change in our behaviour. They can be really interesting questions we don't often think about and we don't often notice by virtue of not observing ourselves from the outside.
Yep.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. For ourselves, what we might notice, some of those early signs of stress or that we might not be coping as well or that we're starting to feel down, typically come in a few different ways. So we'll typically start to notice changes to our thinking, our behaviour, like things in our body sensations and our emotions. And I'll give a few examples of these. So with our thinking, we might notice that when we're feeling stressed out, we tend to be a little bit more negative in our thinking, a bit more predictive thinking, a bit more catastrophizing. So that's thinking. It's almost like we're kind of seeing it with a different lens. So
it's like worst case scenario thinking, isn't it?
Yeah. And there might be, so when you're reflecting this for yourself, there might be a particular story that often comes up when you're stressed. It might be that I'm not good enough, nothing's going to get better. There might be particular things that come up. So if you're feeling more negative in your thinking, more overwhelmed, those are certainly changes that can come up. Within your body, you might notice that you feel more physically anxious, that's your heart beating faster or harder, maybe your breathing changes. You might notice you feel more tense. So I tend to kind of bunch some shoulders and or have a tense jaw. Comes up, and that could be a sign of either overwork or that we're feeling kind of stressed out.
Yep.
If we're just feeling a bit uneasy or unsettled, butterflies in the stomach, one people don't often talk about is you can feel a bit crampy, like you need to wee all the time or you need to go to the toilet all the time if we're feeling quite anxious. Any changes to your body, so doing a bit of a self-scan and notice, am I feeling tense? Am I feeling tired? Again, we kind of touched on that others might notice, but you might notice yourself, changes to your emotions, feeling all emotions, so happiness, sadness, anger, anxiety. I don't like to label emotions as good or bad. Experiencing all of them is part of life, but you might notice more intensity or more often. You might notice you're feeling more anxious, more sad.
Do you think more maybe drastic changes as well in the moods?
Yeah, the more like we kind of call it that labilities, more changes through the day. So you might notice
a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, a bit of a roller coaster where the crash kind of comes a bit sooner or lasts a bit longer, or you feel a bit more what we call reactive through the day. So if you normally might have, like subtle shifts in your mood through the day, maybe you notice those are actually more intense, or that doesn't take as much to trigger those changes to your mood.
Yep, that makes sense.
I often say our environment's also a good thing to notice when you're stressed. I notice, and I'm curious if there's anything you two notice, my dishes or my laundry. If I'm starting to feel stressed, I know there's a couple of things I notice. One is that in my behavior, I tend to put off going to bed and go to sleep later because it often takes us a bit longer to wind down when we're stressed. And I also just do not look at my dishes or laundry. And if I look up and there's dishes I haven't done for a couple of days, the laundry's putting off some of those zero dopamine tasks, that's usually an early sign for me that something's up.
Very relatable.
Gosh, yes. Oh, my goodness.
Or a messy house. So for me, it's a messy house.
Yeah.
Too much pressure. I can't deal with it. Even though you know that it actually does me a world of good to try to declutter, tidy up. But nevertheless, it's like I'll get around to it or never get around to it.
I know. It becomes a downward spiral too, I find. Like,
Absolutely.
You let things go a little bit because you're just feeling overwhelmed, and it's like the distance you have to travel is too far for the amount of petrol in your tank kind of feeling.
Yes.
So you let the dishes go, you let the laundry go for a couple of days, and then it piles up so much that the thought of starting it is just adding to that sense of overwhelm, and you sort of spiral down a little bit, don't you, as things become more and more disorganized and cluttered.
Yeah. And even things that so they're the kind of chore stuff that makes sense that we're like, no thanks.
Yeah.
Even things that we like to do. So typically when we're feeling stressed, it might be because we're overworking, or so things that, for example, if we really like to exercise, and let's say going for a walk, doing some Pilates or listening to music, doing mindfulness, all that healthy stuff that helps, seeing friends, we might notice if we feel that there's a bit less space for that. And so we kind of pull back also from the things that help and the things that help us feel good.
There's a bargaining. So if there's sort of what work-wise, we're trying to get things done before the end of the year.
Definitely.
And then what happens is that I'm just I'll just miss that gym class so I can do more for work so I can finish on time. So there's this bargaining that happens cognitively. And then I feel like, if I do that, then I know that I'm, hopefully I'm going to wind up at the end of the year nicely. I'll wrap up all this work. But it may not necessarily do me any good. Yeah.
Yeah, and creep in subtly. So there are things like finishing work or study later than usual, or overworking, or not having that kind of hard cut-off time so we don't properly wind down. We then get a worse sleep, and it can kind of
snowball.
That's what I was looking for. Yeah. And snowball and come in. I'd say noticing those. There was another one that jumped in my mind coming up. So we're talking about things that I do a bit less of. Things we do a bit more of, procrastination, big one, putting things off.
Yes.
Really common sign of stress. I often say, look, time management or procrastination is really a time management issue or a laziness issue. Very, very rarely, if ever. It's often there is something happening, whether it's we're feeling stressed, we don't have the capacity, like there's something comes off, like do that bit of that self-reflection, say, is there what's showing up for me? Is there a reason I'm avoiding this? Particularly if it's something that's important to you and that you might want to do it.
Yep.
Maybe like, am I too tired? Does it feel like there's too much on my plate? To kind of come back, early warning signs, have a bit of a think, pop them down in either note section of your phone or write them down and say, what are the things that I typically notice? Think back on times in the past and what are the signs for me? Because they will be different for everyone.
Great way to check in.
It is, yeah. And that's great advice, Beck. Thank you.
Relax.
What would you say are some of the different ways? You've already mentioned that we all react differently. Obviously, the way we're going to cope is going to be different too. Can you give us some examples of the different ways people might cope during this time?
Yeah, definitely. I'll probably talk a bit more about how some healthy ways that we can cope for our own personal self-care.
Yeah,
so we might talk a little bit later on as we go about ways that we can cope through this season with with loneliness, with family, with friends, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I have to say to begin with, and it's a very boring answer, but to begin with, it's the foundational stuff. And these are like our kind of that bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, what are the things that I need to have a solid foundation to feel good? And it does often come back to the basics. And sometimes we can feel a little bit of resistance to this if we're experiencing a lot of stress and, we're being told to do something very basic. But they're essentials for a reason because they do help. And so these things like getting enough sleep, getting regular and adequate food in, moving our bodies and connecting. With sleep, trying to maintain a regular bedtime, which I know can be hard with end of year events, everything else, but trying to go to bed and wake up at similar times, trying to avoid coffee or other stimulants before we go to sleep. For example, caffeine has a half-life about 6 hours. So if you're having a coffee at about 6 o'clock at night, even if you're falling asleep, that can interrupt the quality of your sleep.
I did not know that. Half-life of 6 hours. Wow. So quite long.
It is, And some people say, Rebecca, I fall straight asleep after I have a coffee. And yes, you may fall asleep, but the quality might not be as good. So listen to your body, check in with how you feel. Everyone's different. If you really enjoy your coffee, you're sleeping okay, you might be the exception, fine.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, those stimulants can make a difference. One that's very relevant this time of year is alcohol. Because alcohol can have an inhibiting or relaxing effect, often That is also probably an early warning sign you might notice is drinking a bit more, whether it's through social events, whether it's at home. And so if we're having trouble sleeping, sometimes people can increase our alcohol use a bit more. And that's also something that actually disrupts the quality of our sleep. Even though we might have that initial relaxing effect and fall asleep, it is something that obviously there's the health consequence, but it impacts the quality of sleep.
I imagine given this time of the year with all the social activities and everyone's sort of saying we must catch up. So we feel that pressure to participate in these social activities. There's going to be a fair bit of drinking happening.
Yeah.
So that can easily get out of hand too, that we don't really notice or take stock of.
Definitely. And it's a huge part of the Australian culture, alcohol.
Very much.
And so I think just, listen to your body, be mindful, pace yourself, drink responsibly, as the ad says. Think of a limit, stick with it. And just notice, it's just that slow creep. If you're noticing through the week that more and more is coming in, that's time to check in. In terms of your general sleep things that also help with sleep, having a ritual, so similar things that you do each night, having a time that you cut off to wind down to go to bed, avoiding napping through the day. This is hard if you've finished work for the year or you finished uni for the year. Often we start to sleep in and then we might nap through the day. If we can't regulate our sleep time, try and have a regularish wake time. Trying to avoid napping, if you must, less than an hour, less than half an hour ideally. A little bit now and then, fine, but that can also impact on us falling asleep.
Yep.
Sleep, vitally important. Eating, I often say, look, getting in enough. Ideally, try and get your 3 nutritious meals and snacks in a day. What I often say to people is, for our mood maintenance, for our mental well-being, it takes a lot of energy, more than we think, to run our brains. They're very greedy in terms of the energy they need. So making sure you're getting in enough. And at this time of year, fed is best. So, there's a lot of demands that are in place. If health is a priority, of course, that's important, but having some things you can just grab can really reduce stress. Things like frozen meals for the freezer, squeezy yogurts, protein shake. If you get to have some self-compassion for yourself and cut yourself a break, and fed is best in that regard.
Yeah, very good point.
If the idea of coming home and cooking the same meal as you regularly might means that you don't have tea, a frozen meal is fine.
Yep, absolutely. Better than not eating.
Absolutely. Moving your body, the same. So try and get up to 30 to 60 minutes a day of movement or exercise. It doesn't have to be particularly vigorous, so choose something that you actually enjoy and are likely to do. This could be dancing, yoga, or even a walk around the block. I'm curious, is there anything you guys particularly like for moving your body? I know everyone's different with what they like.
Well, there's a lot of YouTube videos, so, I think it's really convenient. That's come out of, a lot of it has come out of since lockdown. And there are things like Zumba, I'm sure it kind of gets people moving. I think a friend of mine told me about, what did she call it? I forget, but it is like walking, but it's like power walking, and you follow a YouTube video doing that. So you can do that at home. You follow them and you do it at home, and it's not running, it's not jogging, it's a little bit like power walking. So it does get the heart rate up and going. So similar, I mean, Zumba just adds some music to it, but they're a little bit more up tempo or a bit more fast paced.
Yeah, right.
Brilliant.
Yeah, for me, I think I love to do dancing stuff. So I definitely availed myself of some of those YouTube videos. If anyone knows the Les Mills fitness programs, there are a couple of dance ones. One's called Shabam, and the other one's called Body Jam, and they are fantastic. And you can look them up on YouTube and find dance classes that you can just do at home, which are fantastic. Probably my main go-to one would be walking, I think, just because you can sort of mindfully enjoy being outside,
absolutely,
and you can take it as fast or as slow as you feel. It's just got that dual benefit of, yes, you're moving, but you're also outside, you're getting some sun, or not sun, just light maybe, this hard to get sun at
bring
the
a raincoat if you're in Melbourne.
Exactly, raincoat.
Come prepared.
Absolutely. And I often listen to a podcast, which maybe someone's doing that right now. Maybe someone's walking and listening to us right now. If you are, good on you.
Yes, that's right.
I would agree. Took the words right out of my mouth. I think walking is typically my go-to because it's runners on or shoes on, and you don't have to think or decide. If you already have an established exercise routine, try and stick to it if you can. Even if you don't exercise too much, like getting out for a walk, it doesn't have to be a super long amount of time. An online exercise, it doesn't have to be the gym, but taking a little bit of time to move your body. So there's a psychological benefit to this in that it helps to lift our mood. It's also something that helps to reduce our cortisol and reduce our stress. So closing that physical stress loop at the end of each day. So if you've got a month, which is pretty intense stuff coming up, like it's really important that you kind of drain the bucket throughout the month, and exercise is a really helpful way of doing that. As well, there is also some research around it also helps to enhance our concentration going for a brisk walk. So it's one of those annoyingly beneficial things. So mine key would be, have a bit of a routine, something you don't have to think too much about. Something that fits into your day, and really booking it in the same way as you would anything else. Think of it like brushing your teeth.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you said there, what really resonated for me, which is about make it easy for yourself. Sometimes people think about exercise or movement. It's like, oh, my God, you watch those shows on TV where people like working out for 4 hours a day and lifting weights and heaving till they vomit. And you think, oh, I couldn't do that. It's too hard. And you think, oh, what's 15-minute walk going to do? Actually, quite a bit, right? It can be really light. You can not even get up to a puff. Your heart rate doesn't even have to increase that much, but actually it still will have a benefit. And I think it's that thing of saying some movement is better than no movement, even if it's a tiny bit of movement.
Absolutely. And that touches on one of the thinking styles, which can be that kind of slippery slope to our well-being, is ask yourself, what do I feel is enough? Because sometimes we look for the perfect the perfect exercise routine, or we have kind of like a kind of unconscious idea or subconscious idea of what makes it worth it. And some don't let perfect get in the way of good enough. If you've had a really rough day and you can't do the super intense workout usually doing, you just want to go for a walk, but it's raining and you don't want to do a long one, it's keeping in place, like, what is the value? And it's actually taking the time for yourself to actively wind down. And even a short one, like you remind yourself it is a priority to me that this is part of my day.
Sometimes just putting your pair of shoes out or the sneakers at the door just gets you kind of, ready and prepared. It's right there. The shoes are there. Put the shoes on. Off
That's
you
it.
go.
That's
I
it.
have the ugliest pair of Skechers that one of our counsellors is always trying to get me to get rid of, but they get me out of my walks because you do not have to do any shoelaces. So whatever gets you out.
Oh, I love it. Actually, you know what? I used to do something similar to that. Is I would often wear like under a dress or something. I'd wear like workout pants, like not like
shorts,
like the what do you call them, like not bike shorts, but like the slightly longer ones that you wear to the gym. I'd wear that under a skirt instead of like stockings or something like that, and then all I'd have to do is whip off my dress and I was ready to go.
Whatever makes it easiest, isn't it? Just
and they're quite warm. It's quite warm to wear that under a dress.
True. Absolutely.
Yeah.
To recap it in, getting enough sleep, as well as you can, getting enough to eat, getting that in regularly, trying to move your body, connecting with others. I know it's often a busy time socially, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all restorative or necessarily enjoyable social connections. So making time to connect both with others, talking and checking with people who you care about, taking time to slow down, and time to check in with yourself. I often think that whether it's formal relaxation, so it might be through an app like Smiling Mind, which I highly recommend, some mindfulness exercises. Time to connect with both yourself and others through the month is really important because we can feel pretty busy.
Yeah. I think also doing things you really love, like what just popped into my head then is like I'm a bit of a crafter. I like to knit. Whenever I have a new knitting project, I get really excited by it. Like I become quite absorbed. Like, how we as psychologists, we talk about this word flow, like when you're really engaged with something and you're really enjoying it and there's this lapse of time that you don't even notice because you've been so absorbed in what you're doing. That's a great feeling and that's a really restorative thing as well. I reckon what I'm taking out of this conversation is I might go off to Spotlight, during the sales or something, see if I get myself some wool and make a new something, even if you do something like that.
Yeah. Is it about prioritizing it as well? I was going to say, you find the time that when things are busy, making sure that time's in. Sometimes it's booking it in early in the day, carving a bit of time out for yourself, that it's important to have those things that are just for you.
Yeah, it does 100%. Form part of self-care, doesn't it?
It does.
Kind of like a me time.
Yep.
And self-care looks different for everyone as well. Like there'll probably be, I don't know if we were going to chat about later, but just in terms of what our personal self-care looks like, that is different for everyone. Some of us feel regenerated and refreshed being around other people, and some of us really need a bit of quiet time in the week.
Oh, 100%. And so, I always think that's the essential difference between an introvert and an extrovert is that an introvert feels a bit drained if they have too much social time and they need a lot more me time and quiet time, either with a smaller group of people or just on their own. And an extrovert needs the energy of other people.
Like,
And so,
and it might be kind of meaningful interaction.
Yeah. So it's not like one way is right and the other way is wrong.
No.
It's about just knowing yourself and where do I sit on that? Am I one of those people that needs to recharge my battery by some time on my own or quality time? Or am I one of those people that needs to get out and do stuff and see people and be busy and
novelty.
That stimulation and novelty? Which kind of person am I and how do I cater for that?
Absolutely. So check your social battery, and that can change over time as well. As a bit of your self check-in, check your social battery, and if you need some time to yourself or some time to connect in a meaningful way, book that in.
Yep. And
Book
speaking of checking things in, maybe it's also worthwhile talking about the Dailyo app. So that's an app to check your mood or to track your mood. I usually spruik that with clients who want to know a little bit more about their mood, how they're feeling, how they're tracking. So I know it's a free app. I can't remember who started it. You use emojis to get to rate your mood, but it's associated with activities as well. So you get to also choose the emoji of the activity that you participated in or you did something, whatever tasks you did for the day. And it helps you kind of look back over the 7 days, how was your mood? It has a bit of a graph. If you pay, there is a bit more, what's the word, like a bit more features to it.
Yeah.
But the free version just allows you to track that mood. Yeah. Still has adequate enough of stuff.
I love a good app recommendation. Is
absolutely.
It
that? Is it DAILYO? As in the word
daily? DAYLIO.
Oh, DAY. Oh, DAY. Oh, so like the word day and then Leo.
Leo, yes. LIO.
Good. See,
so
I wouldn't have known
how
to look for it. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, good.
And it's easy to look at because you get to just see the graph over the week, but also if it's per day, then you get to see the emoji over the day and the activities associated with it. It's pretty easy to use.
It's a great way of looking back over the week as well, because we tend to judge how we've been based on how we feel in the moment. And so, someone says, "How are you going?" You go, good, thanks.
Yep.
And so I think that the app would be a great way of being able to see a bit of a bird's eye view of, what the ups and downs have been.
I like it. That's a good one. I'm going to look that one up. Thanks, Yvonne.
That's all good. Well, we've had some really good tips so far, some good coping strategies for various people, but are there also some unhealthy coping habits that we do tend to adopt, especially during this time?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll kind of mark it in that there's often the way that we cope, it's not good or bad. And so as we talk about what might feel unhealthy or unhelpful coping strategies, something I often preface it with is there is a function for everything. And it's all information. So as we're talking through, when we say unhealthy or unhelpful, often they refer to things that either in the long term don't promote well-being or that might not be in line with what our personal goals are for our health and well-being or our relationships. Some of the common ones that we notice that might fit in there, avoidance, that might be avoiding social situations, avoiding obligation. Those are things like procrastinating, withdrawing, pulling back. We might notice through this time overindulgence, or so these might be things like binge eating, excessive drinking, or drug use. So things that are beyond, that either feel out of control or are beyond what we would normally do, that might then have an impact on our mood, our energy, or our ability to do our day-to-day stuff.
Overeating is so easy, particularly when you're invited to this or that, or you're hosting this thing, that thing. It's very easy to get caught up in that overeating, and not necessarily, they're not all healthy foods either.
Yeah.
No, and I think this it's a double-edged sword coming up to Christmas, because what I see a lot of might be overeating, binge eating, and I say, look, give yourself some space over the Christmas period to enjoy the food. It's often a time for you. We've got lots of yummy things we might not make at other times.
Yeah.
It can also be for a lot of people, the stress associated with the holiday season, being around family, is also something that can trigger restrictive eating or under eating. So if we're around family who maybe comment on our body weight, shape and size, if we've had a history of disordered eating, there is a lot of diet culture stuff that comes out around summer in Australia as well.
Of course.
And so I would say, tuning into how you're feeling. If you're noticing that you are intentionally restricting eating less than you normally might, or if you're noticing you're feeling uncomfortable, like checking in and asking, what's the function? Why is this showing up? Because both are pretty common around this time of year. It's a more important time than ever to reminding ourselves to bring back that healthy relationship with food, taking the labeling out. It's not good,
not
bad,
good or bad food.
No, like good or bad food,
it's
just that
food.
or the other. It's just food. Let yourself enjoy it. And also, if this is a time that you've noticed in the past tends to be a bit of a risky period taking care of yourself. If you're going to be around family, reminding or friends or others who might make comments about eating habits, body weight, shape or size, or anything else, kind of keeping that in mind before you're going in and reminding yourself of the good work probably done through the year and keeping yourself healthy, and that, and what your values are and what your healthy relationship with food looks like. That's one that often comes up this time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Overworking as well, as I think like someone touched on before, finishing later, trying to get everything wrapped up before the end of the year. And it might be that some things genuinely need to be done, but overworking can also be something comes up this time of year that can start to impinge on our well-being. So I touched on before, understanding every coping story will have a function. It might be something that it is meeting a need to some extent. And I'd really encourage that reflection on, what am I getting from this? It may be a short-term anxiety reduction. It may be a sense of enjoyment. It may be to get a certain feeling or to avoid a certain feeling. Rather than punishing yourself, bringing in some self-compassion and asking, what function is this serving? And is there either a healthier or more adaptive way that I can cope that might serve a similar function but helps me to feel better in the long term and is more in line with my values?
I like that. Yeah, I think sort of identifying what's underneath the behaviour that might be problematic or becoming problematic for you as a coping strategy. Like, why am I doing it? What is it giving me beyond the obvious? What psychological need maybe is it meeting, and is there another way that I can meet that psychological need that I can feel better about?
So it might be, drinking, for example, if we feel socially anxious before these kind of events, in the short term, alcohol might help us to feel a bit more relaxed, less inhibited, but the next day we might get a bit of anxiety about, what did I say, what came up? And so, okay, there's a need there. What can help me to feel more calm before I go in and to get through it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Sounds like it's getting us to think a little bit more critically, but also like reflecting on a little bit more, especially going into maybe certain social situations, to think a little bit more clearly beforehand, so that, whatever functions that activity is going to do, it's going to serve us in a more perhaps adaptive or healthier way.
Yeah. I'll go on, Beck. Sorry.
No, not at all. I was just going to, and I think when we can look at it in that way, it often, a lot of people can punish ourselves, like, why do I do this? Particularly if it's something we know kind of inherently isn't overly healthy. And I think that goes a long way to help with self-compassion if we can reflect on what the function is, because we're not doing it because we're stupid or anything else. We're kind of saying, okay, well, I can kind of see how I got there, but what do I want to do instead? What were you saying, Liz, before I interrupted
Oh, no, I was just going to say, look, and it's probably a whole other podcast topic, which we will do at some point, but just thinking about being socially anxious, that sometimes the big barrier in social situations is feeling like you're not good at making conversation and you can't think of things to say. And so it can be, you could think of it as an opportunity to try out some little skills, even just things like, I'm just going to smile and make eye contact, because you'd be surprised at how many people open up to you when you open up your body language to them, and just experimenting with that. And that's the thing that you start with. Another time you might work on something that I often tell my clients, which is just think about 2 conversational rules, which is when you're asked a question, this is the first rule, when you're asked a question, always elaborate on your response. So even if they ask you a closed question that has just a simple 1-word or a yes-no answer, don't just give a yes, no or 1-word answer. How are you today? Good. No. Just say, good, I've had a really great day today. I went to the shops and I finished all my Christmas shopping and I'm feeling really great about that, because what that does is create little conversational hooks for people to then respond to, and that's how you get that flow of conversation. And the other side of the other conversational rule is about being curious. So ask questions, be genuinely curious, be an investigative reporter. Tell me more about that. I'd like to know more about that.
I mean, people love to talk about themselves,
they
right?
really do.
We often are in our minds saying, what do I say and what do I do?
Exactly.
But,
get
be curious
them talking
and ask.
about themselves. 100%. Yeah. So anyway, that was a detour. Sorry, guys, but it just made me think about, like,
great tip.
You might want to think, okay, if I can delay my first drink and try some of these things out instead. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, great. So, Beck, do you have any hot tips? We love a good hot tip that you can share with our listeners for this time of year. You mentioned before, check in with yourself. How do you check in with yourself?
Yes. So I'd say I do have a hot tip. I might even have a few, actually.
Excellent.
Awesome. I'd say in a couple of different areas on checking in with yourself, on dealing with others, and dealing with loneliness are probably the 3 that I'll come into. Checking in with yourself. This is something where the practice of mindfulness and that being that observing self really comes into play. If mindfulness is something that is a bit new, one of the apps I really recommend is the Smiling Mind app. It is free. They have bite-sized mindfulness exercises that are about 2.5, 3 minutes, which is very nice. And they have some lovely explanations, and you can learn a little bit more about some of the practical ways you can engage in self-reflection, take a pause moment. Really, basically, I would say checking in with yourself, noticing any body sensations or changes that come up, any emotional changes, doing a bit of a scan, what am I thinking? How am I feeling? What am I responding to? Some of the things we talked about earlier, the questions you can ask around checking in on your early warning signs. You can do that at any point. If you want to rewind to the start, jot a few of them down, doing a bit of a self-scan and checking in. What might show up? That would probably be my hot tip around how we can do that.
Nice. You could even journal it, couldn't you? Yeah, writing down sometimes the time you take to put the words on the page allows you to reflect a little bit more. It slows down your thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's pause points and reflection bits. Daily walk is a great time for this. Give yourself time to pause and to notice where we're at. So that would be, I'd say, in terms of checking in with yourself.
Yep.
Similarly as well, you can do this a little bit. So that's in the moment stuff. In advance as well, you might even grab a cuppa, take a bit of time to sit down and reflect on past festive seasons and think, are there any things that I can maybe anticipate that either have been particularly triggering, that might be, like speed bumps or things that might come up? What are the things that help? You can kind of do a bit of that in advance and have a bit of a think about, is there anything that, anticipate, might come up, and how would I cope with it? And that really draws on our resilience by being able to look over time and how we've coped in the past, right? So we often talk about, people often say, look, what's the magic wand? What's the trick? There is often, we have a lot of strength within ourselves and a lot of things that we've done over time that have been helpful. Think about what could come up, how would I cope with it?
Yeah, we're pretty wise, aren't we, really?
We have
trust
resources.
Ourselves.
Yeah.
And, and I sometimes have people kind of say, Beck, I have never done anything right. And I say, look, well, you're here today and to come in. When you go back, even if there was something, if you say, oh, that didn't go well at all, that's actually information as well. So say to yourself, well, if it didn't go well, what was it? And how might I do it differently? That's part of that learning from past experiences, is we can kind of, all right, well, if I didn't feel like it did go well, how might I approach it differently in the future? Yeah.
Good point.
Dealing with family. So one I thought was important for today, because we often spend a lot more time this time of year around people. So family, for example, you see the Hallmark card and everyone's sitting around the fire and they all look very happy and content. And this is actually a really major source of stress for a lot of people this time of year. And even, you might love your family, but sometimes there's certain personalities or for certain periods of time that can cause conflict or cause a bit of stress even in the lead up. Some tips that I would have around dealing with not necessarily family, but relationships this time of year, or time where you might be around people that challenge you or trigger difficult feelings. One is to set realistic expectations. By this I mean, reflect on what is the expectation or the idea that I have about this season and how I should feel, how it should go. And then ask you to, just based on the past, what does this person have the capacity to give?
Yes.
And this doesn't mean putting our kind of bar on the floor, but what it means is just realistically stepping back and saying, actually, what's realistic that might come up? Because sometimes we might expect that we have a totally harmonious day and we spend 12 hours with family who we'd never spend that much time with feeling great. And then they expect, or that, the lunch runs smoothly, whatever it might be, and that totally goes to the bin. And then that, I guess, discrepancy can be what causes a lot of distress. I often say best case, worst case, and most likely. So meeting our brains somewhere in the middle. What's most likely to come up for me and how would I cope with it?
Yeah, nice one.
Realistic expectations. Boundaries. Setting boundaries can be difficult with people that we care about, but ahead of time, giving yourself some time to think about, when I say setting boundaries, practically what I mean with that is it might be how much time, if any, that you have to allocate and to spend. And even if you're off work or uni, just because you are technically free doesn't mean you are available.
Good point.
So
yes.
It might be that you think ahead of time. There might be a certain amount of time, whether it's for a Christmas lunch or something else, you say, actually, this is how much time I have for that. So setting a boundary, sticking firm to that. If there are certain conversations, so I touched on before that one that can come up this time of year might be family or friends commenting on weight, for example. And it might be saying, every year you go in and they say, do you have a partner? Oh, you look like you've lost or gained or whatever, commenting on appearance or other things. Setting boundaries around these kind of conversations doesn't have to be confrontational. It can often feel that way. And they can even be simple redirection things of, that's not something I'm comfortable speaking about today, but can you tell me about blah? Right. Kind of thinking, if there's any known button pushing topics, if it's a day we're often feeling, or a period we're often feeling increased stress and other things, remind yourself you can come back to it after festive season if it's still going to be there. But that it can be redirected. So it might be someone who you put a quite firm boundary in with and say, I do not speak about this. It might be someone who you need to more redirect in a subtle way.
In a gentle way.
Yeah, in a gentle way, just asking a question and saying, like, I can understand where you're coming from, but that's not something I'm comfortable talking about. Can you tell me about this instead?
Yeah, or even you could even, if you find that part a bit too confrontational, if someone says, oh, you look like you've put on weight or you look like you've lost weight, you could not even respond to that. And that might be a way of putting the boundary down. And you could say, well, how about you, Grandma? You look pretty schmick today. Where'd you get that outfit? And just redirect it in that way without even kind of going into it. And you're sort of then sending an implicit message that I don't really want to talk about that.
Yep, absolutely. And there can be a lot of pressure this time of year that we must spend time with family, and not everyone is connected to their family. Not everyone enjoys spending time with their family, or it might be another significant person in your life. And what I say is, it's okay to disengage. So if for your mental well-being, for your sense of self, if spending Christmas or the holiday season by yourself or with friends or with your own social network is actually something that you've learned over time is far better for your own well-being, that is okay. So first of all, it is okay to disengage.
To do that.
Yeah. Give yourself permission to do that. And sometimes people can, they might ask, when are you seeing your family or when are you doing this? And remind yourself it's okay if you don't want to take that time. And if due to whether it's family, the culture within your family, like certain pressures that you don't feel able to say no, because that's also common as well, where the relationships are still important and we don't feel great there, but we also don't want to completely disengage. Having a bit of a plan around, how do I care for myself? So if I'm staying with family or if I'm spending the day and maybe I feel a bit less freedom about the kind of feedback I can give or whether or not I can go, what are the things through the year that help me to take care of myself after that? It might be tuning in with someone who you care about, who understands how you feel, that's outside of that area that you can talk it through with. It might be having some alone time, taking some time to self-soothe afterward, really taking that time if you do need to go to take care of yourself.
Right.
Yep. Fantastic.
And loneliness?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you read my mind. I was going to say, what if we, the opposite, where it's not about too much of the people that you find it hard to spend time with? What if you're just feeling really disconnected and lonely? What are some things that might help there?
It's a good point, because we spend a lot of time talking about family or friends or others, but a really common thing that comes up, a theme around the festive season or the holiday break or Christmas, whichever you celebrate, is loneliness. And this can come in two ways. So loneliness if we don't have a close network where we're living or in our lives. If we're going through a period of estrangement or separation, it might be feeling misunderstood and feeling a sense of loneliness even if we're around other people. There can be this stereotype that it's sad to spend Christmas by yourself. People say, well, it's depressing or it's sad. I should be with family. I should be here. And even if they don't want to, there's a lot of social pressure. And I'd say, like, when those feelings of loneliness show up, making time to connect if you don't have your circle kind of where you are. So I'm thinking of some of our lovely international students who might have family overseas, who might not be able to afford to get home, or who might just not have people locally to catch up with. Connecting online, trying to do things to connect back to your culture or your family culture. So making recipes that you might like, creative ways of connecting.
Nice.
Yeah. Creative ways of connecting, being creative about who that is with as well. So it doesn't have to be family through that period. It might be close friends. It might be local barista or the florist at the market. Just those small connections are still important.
Yeah.
Even if it's not necessarily on the day. Volunteering and community events. So there is a lot on around this time of year. So, giving back can also, so engaging in gratitude and giving back can also be something that helps us to feel more connected to community. There's a lot of, whether it's soup kitchens, whether it's helping with charity drives, Christmas carols, there's a lot. Volunteering can be something that really helps us to feel connected with the community, even if we're either far from home.
you're not religious or anything like that, you can still attend services like churches and help out that way, or just be a part of a group that way too. Maybe you have friends who go to church and then you might just go with them. And it's just a connection, and it's a sense of community. Yeah. And it's a nice way to kind of meet other people during this time.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of groups. And so I'd say, Google is your friend. The old good old-fashioned community notice board. There are a lot of people who are in similar situations. There are social support groups, there are charities volunteering, there's fun things that are on like Christmas carols and all the rest. Having a bit of a plan to be engaged. The other is you also don't have to be around people if you don't want around that time. Like if you're actually wanting a bit of a break, you prefer to wind down, or maybe you're spending the day by yourself if it's for Christmas, for example. It doesn't have to be traditional. Make some plans for yourself. You might have a movie day, or you might cook something really delicious for yourself and just enjoy a day of sleeping in, being in your pajamas. Like if you don't celebrate a particular holiday that a lot of people in your circle do, that's also totally fine.
I know that just going back to understanding that we've probably got a lot of RMIT students who are listening. In previous years, I think our chaplaincy might have put on or organised some stuff during the festive season for students, international students predominantly, maybe who don't celebrate. So have a look out for that. I think on Student Life, whether it's through the Facebook, whether it's through Campus Buzz, they'll probably have some information about maybe some student events that are coming up over the festive season. Check it out, because if you're an international student, some of your friends have gone back, maybe it's still worth looking at. The International Student Peer Support Program have stuff coming up towards the end of this year. One of them was, I think it's like a Christmas walk or checking out the Christmas lights. And I thought that's a really nice way to kind of get some of the international students providing peer support to each other, and also get to check out the local Melbourne sort of Christmas lights scene. What a way to explore Melbourne as well. Certainly some ways to connect. Hopefully people will certainly get these information in their inboxes, but do check them out.
Yeah, fantastic. And Beck, you mentioned volunteering earlier, and I just had a bit of sneaky Google while you guys were talking. There is actually a website called volunteer.vic.gov.au that you can go and have a look at, that looks at sort of what some volunteering opportunities might be. So if that's something that's really caught your interest, maybe follow up there.
Brilliant. I think that's an excellent idea. Yeah, Google is your friend, absolutely. So, get out and have a look, have a bit of a browse. One of the things I love about living in Melbourne in Australia is that it is such a diverse society here in terms of cultural background as well. A lot of the public holidays and whatnot are still centered around, some of those Christian events like Christmas and so on. But there is so much happening. Sometimes can feel like everyone is celebrating Christmas or everyone is doing this, but there is such a lively and diverse communities within Australia. I'd really encourage you to get out there, have a look. There'll be more than you think.
Yes, absolutely. Lots of festivals and things around this time of year as well that are from all sorts of cultural groups and for different reasons. So you're bound to find something that interests you.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, oh, God, sorry, Yvonne. Oh, gosh, I was jumping ahead.
No, that's okay. I was thinking from the flip side of it. For example, it's great tips about being connected and checking in with ourselves and checking in, have others check in with me. But I suppose what happens, though, on the occasion if my health professional or my mental health professional or my support worker, they may not be available for me during this time. Everyone's, things are winding down, services are closing. So where else can I locate some helpful resources or support?
That's a really good question. And I think this is also something that very commonly comes up this time of year. We usually get a bit of a triple whammy of it can be an increased time of stress, and also our professional supports tend to be on leave. So GP, psychologists, and DIS support workers, that's also helpful for planning around. I often say to people, think about, first of all, the stuff we've talked about all of today. What's in my toolkit? What helps me to feel good? What helps me to connect? There might be times where we're feeling really distressed. We need a bit more support. Looking at professional support. I'll kind of look at it in two different ways, general public and RMIT.
Sure.
So if you're an RMIT student, on the RMIT counselling website, you will see there is some information around counselling supports available to RMIT students. So if you're located within Australia, there is a 24/7 urgent mental health line by phone or text in contact. And there's also some helpful resources on there as well. If you're within the general public, some things I often recommend, so for phone counselling, and this is also a good one with Google because the ones I'll recommend aren't exhaustive by any means, but Lifeline and Beyond Blue, so web chat or text if you don't like talking, phone calls. If you're really struggling, please reach out. These numbers, so often people say, look, Rebecca, do I have to be suicidal or do I have to be a 10 out of 10 distressed? And so there are a number of professional urgent counselling support lines that are available, and I'd recommend that they are something you can contact through the season. They tend to operate through the public holidays, through those times. In terms of managing our wellbeing, if you're tech savvy, a lot of them are pretty intuitive apps. If I mentioned the Dailyo app, which I haven't tried but I've heard good things about, I love Smiley Mind app. If you're looking for something to help you get through the moment, thinking what's in my toolbox, some of those resources can be really helpful.
Yeah,
Great.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. Thanks, Beck. That's fantastic advice. And I think your point about you don't have to be so unwell that you might be on the verge of being hospitalised to reach out to those urgent support lines. You can just be feeling like you just really need to talk to someone in that moment, and please use those services. That's exactly what they're for.
Yeah, absolutely. And planning as well. So if you have a physical health or a mental health condition and you have a regular treating team, that's also a really reasonable conversation to have, in the November, December, is to say, look, particularly if it can be a tricky time, let's do some planning about how I manage through this time. So a bit of like kind of planning with, okay, well, who are my supports, professional and personal? What are the things that help me? Like that is a really valid use of your session time.
Very proactive
so
steps.
touching base with your existing supports as well, because they can often help to link you into supports that are personalised for you and are really relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. All good points. So I was just curious, ladies, as we're winding down towards the end of this year, what's something that you guys are looking forward to about the end of the year?
Oh, that's a really good question.
There's something you're looking forward to?
Food, Christmas lunch, I think. My family does celebrate Christmas, and we have a really nice Christmas lunch every year. So that I would say that's something I'm certainly looking forward to, is a bit of downtime to relax, spend a bit more time with the family.
Will you be
really
cooking?
Lunch. No, I'm typically a bit cheeky with that. I usually get down. I know Mum does a lot of the heavy lifting there. So perhaps this year, part of my connection point, maybe I will arrive a bit earlier and do a bit more of the heavy lifting there. But I would say taking some time
do the taste test, right?
Yeah, do the taste test and come in.
Being there early.
Christmas lunch, absolutely, spending a bit of time with family, but really just some time to disconnect and recharge. So a bit of a slower pace over those couple of weeks, whether it's going to the beach, going for a walk, reading some of the 500 books I've bought in the last 2 years that I haven't started or finished. There's some things I'm hoping to disconnect a bit and do.
Oh, nice. I like it. I like it. What about you, Yvonne?
I don't celebrate Christmas. Ironically, we are actually hosting like a Christmas lunch this year. My ethnicity, we also very much gather around food. And so I guess Christmas is an excuse to have some sort of a meal. And Christmas this year is an excuse to actually make a bit of a bigger meal.
Nice.
I'll be doing the taste testing, hopefully.
Good job.
My partner's the one who's cooking. This is actually quite different because traditionally we probably go out and eat somewhere at a Chinese restaurant, for example, or have yum cha. And I actually quite like that tradition. But this year we're actually hosting. This will be something different, and I've got some family members coming down, and this will be an interesting time of the year, as you say, Beck, because we are adults having to spend an intense amount of time together. So I'm certainly going to listen to those tips again, and in terms of, certain topics, boundaries, those sorts of aspects of the relationship, because we don't spend a lot of time, but then we're spending an enormous amount of time together. So that'll be interesting with the intensity.
Yeah.
And what about you, Liz?
A couple of things sprung to my mind, like many of the things you guys have said as well. But one thing that we always do before Christmas is we bake some sort of goods that are traditional to our family and also to my culture, which is my family's Croatian. And so we will get together and make a very elaborate cake for any Croatian listeners. It's called orahnjača. It's a walnut cake. Anyway, it's very fiddly to make, but it's really nice because we sort of do it together, and everyone contributes, which is a nice process. But in the lead up to Christmas, I always look forward to that. Actually, the other thing I was going to say is it's a weird thing to maybe enjoy because a lot of people complain about it, but I quite like buying Christmas presents for people because I like thinking about the person, what I know about them. I like thinking about the idea of what I can do to make them happy. And so it's actually quite a joyful thing for me. And especially when I get I nail it and I go, I'm really happy with that choice. Like, that's a great one, So it's a time for buying Christmas presents. For me, is a time to think about my love and care for the person that I'm buying the present for, and a way that I can make them happy. And so it's quite a positive experience for me. So actually, weirdly, not many people like it, but I actually do like Christmas shopping. So I'm quite looking forward to that.
You really live that statement, the joy of giving.
Yes.
That's so lovely.
You've reminded me, Liz, Christmas songs, the cornier the better. Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas. I'm looking forward to shamelessly bringing those out, but probably before the 1st of December.
Oh gosh, my husband was laughing at me the other day because I was watching a really corny Christmas movie on Netflix, and they're all coming out now. It's like the Christmas Prince and the blah blah blah. It's like they're Christmas bad, they're like trashy as, but I just love it. It's like a bit of junk food, but on your screen. You know, I actually like all that. It's lighthearted,
warming,
and it's exactly. It is. Exactly. So, don't be embarrassed if you like to watch a whole bunch of Christmas movies.
No, it's okay to have a guilty pleasure.
Exactly.
As we wrap for this episode, I'd like to thank Beck today for her comprehensive list of tips and resources on how we can stay sane and well over the festive season. Thank you also, Liz, my co-host, for her time out from her day off today to chat as we also wrap up for the year. Stay tuned for more episodes in the coming year as we have heaps more to share from the Counselling Armchair. We know this time of the year can be challenging for many, so stay well and stay safe. Do one thing, no matter how small, that brings you some joy, and even if it's taking a picnic rug and lunching in your local park. Let's all meet back here in the new year. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Yvonne. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us today on the Counselling Armchair. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned a useful thing or two. Have a great week, and just remember that life can be amazing. See you next time.
Isn't life so amazing? Sometimes it can get crazy, but hey, that's okay. We've got another day to make mistakes and say sorry. There's no sense in our worry, 'cause all we can do is try our best to make it